Jeff Ross had roasted Hollywood's biggest stars, mocked presidents, and laughed in the face of controversy. But on this night, inside Jimmy Kimmel's studio, the roastmaster himself went too far. What began as comedy ended in silence. And what happened next? No one was prepared for. It started like any other night on late-night television. The lights dimmed. The crowd roared, and Jimmy Kimmel stepped onto the stage with his usual smirk and charm. But beneath the surface of that well-polished routine, something was brewing. The guest that evening was none other than Jeff Ross, the Roastmaster General himself, known for pushing every boundary with jokes that could blister steel. Jeff and Jimmy had a long history of banter, roasts, and respect. They had been friends in the business for years, trading jabs and stories in front of millions. But this night felt different. From the moment Jeff walked on stage, there was tension. Not the usual comedic tension that gives roast comedy its bite, but something darker. Jeff's grin was thinner. Jimmy's laughter was just a second too late, and the audience, always ready to laugh, seemed to sense it too. There was an edge to every joke, a hesitation in every reply. Jeff opened with a few zingers. Brutal, hilarious, and classic Ross. But then, somewhere in the middle of the segment, the roast stopped being funny. A single line, a sharp, pointed insult that cut too deep, changed everything. The crowd gasped. Jimmy froze. And for a moment, live television held its breath. What Jeff said that night was not just another joke. It was personal. It wasn't a roast. It was a revelation dressed as a punchline, something raw and off-limits. He went after something Jimmy had never joked about, something sacred, his family. In one shocking breath, Jeff made a comment about Jimmy's late uncle, a man Kimmel had publicly credited for raising him and inspiring his comedic voice. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't know if they were supposed to. Even the band. Held back, Jimmy's smile vanished in an instant. Gosh, you could feel the mood shift, like a storm rolling in. Jeff, ever the provocateur, doubled down. But this time, it wasn't wit. It was anger, real. Unfiltered frustration disguised in humor. He talked about how Hollywood had gone soft, how hosts like Kimmel used to be edgy but were now puppets for applause. He called out the hypocrisy of the show, the censorship, the politics, the fake laughs. Jimmy, stunned and visibly shaken, tried to steer the conversation back, but Jeff wasn't having it. You can't handle the truth unless it's approved. By PR, Jeff snapped, looking Jimmy dead in the eye. It was no longer a segment. It was a standoff, and millions of viewers were watching it unfold in real time. Jaws dropped. Backstage producers were scrambling. The control room lit up with frantic voices debating whether to cut to commercial or ride it out. But the cameras kept rolling. This wasn't just unexpected, it was unprecedented. Jeff Ross wasn't just roasting a host anymore. He was burning down the entire set with words. Jimmy, now gripping the edge of his desk, stared at Jeff like he didn't recognize him. Gone was the man who used to crack jokes at Comedy Central roasts with a wink and a smile. What stood before Jimmy was a man disillusioned with the machine, frustrated by years of being filtered, restrained, boxed into formats that didn't let him speak freely anymore. You brought me here to be funny, Jeff said, but you can't handle funny when it hurts. What happened to you, Jimmy? The crowd was silent. Dead silent. Kimmel, to his credit, tried to regain control. Jeff, he said, measured and calm, this isn't the place for that kind of talk. But Jeff wouldn't back down. Isn't it, though? He fired back. This is where America comes to laugh, or at least that's what we're supposed to believe. But now it's just where people come to clap at what they're told to clap for. He leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. And you used to be dangerous. Now you're just safe. The words hit harder than any insult could. It's not just because of their bite, but because, deep down, Jimmy knew there was truth buried in them. In that moment, the room felt colder. The cameras still rolled, but everyone on set could feel it. This was no longer entertainment. It was unraveling. Jeff looked out at the audience, as if challenging them too. You all laugh when I roast celebrities, when I say what others won't. But now, I talk about one thing that's real, and everyone panics. This is why comedy's dying. He stood up mid-interview, a clear violation of late-night etiquette, and turned his back to the desk. The audience was frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or just stay quiet. Jimmy remained seated, jaw tight, fingers tapping the desk like a ticking clock. "Jeff, if you want to have a real conversation, we can do that off-air," he said with the calm of someone trying to avoid a full-on explosion. But Ross turned back, his voice shaking now, not from nerves, but from emotion. "Off-air? No, Jimmy. That's the problem.
Right.
You want the truth in private, but the lie in public." He pointed toward the camera. "They deserve better." That point, the head producer gave the cue. The screen cut to commercial suddenly, abruptly, leaving the world in confusion.
Ow.
When the show returned, Jeff Ross was gone. No goodbye. No applause. Just Jimmy alone behind the desk trying to laugh it off with a nervous monologue. But the damage had already been done. For millions watching at home, the real story had already written itself. The internet lit up within seconds. Clips of the confrontation were already spreading across social media, with hashtags like hashtag Jeff Ross Unfiltered and hashtag Kimmel Meltdown trending worldwide. Fans were divided. Some praised Jeff for finally speaking out against the performative nature of late night TV, others slammed him for crossing a personal line and disrespecting a friend on national television. But nobody could deny the impact. Something had shifted, not just between Jeff Ross and Jimmy Kimmel, but in the larger conversation about comedy, censorship, and authenticity. In the days that followed, neither side said much publicly. Jimmy's show avoided mentioning it entirely, as if pretending it hadn't happened would make it disappear. But silence in the digital age is its own statement. Meanwhile, Jeff remained quiet on Twitter, a platform he once used freely, and fans began speculating whether the industry had finally turned its back on him. Bookings disappeared, podcast invitations were pulled, rumors swirled that Jeff had been blacklisted by the network, while others whispered about phone calls from executives warning comedians to stick to the script. But for Jeff, it wasn't about fame anymore. It was about principle. And even if the world wasn't ready to hear what he said, he refused to pretend he didn't mean it. Asterisk in the weeks that followed. The silence between Jeff Ross and Jimmy Kimmel grew louder than any insult could ever echo. No apologies were made, no explanations offered. The network quietly scrubbed the episode from its rerun lineup. Fans on both sides clung to theories. Some believed it was all staged a publicity stunt meant to stir controversy. But others, those who watched closely, knew better. There was something too real in Jeff's eyes that night, something unfiltered. And that kind of honesty doesn't come with camera rehearsals. For Jeff, it marked a painful turning point. A moment where comedy clashed with conscience and career collided with conviction. For Jimmy, it was a haunting reminder that no matter how polished the stage, real emotions can still break through. They never spoke publicly again. But the moment lived on in YouTube clips, in fan forums, in every whispered conversation about what really happened that night. And while the world eventually moved on, the truth remained. Jeff Ross didn't just walk off Jimmy Kimmel's stage. He lit a match and walked away from the very world he helped build, leaving behind a question that still lingers in a world obsessed with comfort and control. Is there still room for the kind of comedy that tells the uncomfortable truth?